Welcome to Cold War Conversations, the home of real stories of the Cold War. Due to some last-minute problems, this episode is a repeat of a brilliant episode from Juli, who was born in East Germany and now lives in Ireland. It's well worth hearing again.
And that was the first time I experienced kind of violence from the state, because suddenly the water cannons and the gas throwers and gas bombs were out. And it was exciting, it was exhilarating, but it was also like I was worried that that I don't get home. And I wasn't sure, how do you get to see your mom again?
This is Cold War Conversations. If you're new here, you've come to the right place to listen to first-hand Cold War history accounts. Do make sure you follow us in your podcast app so that you don't miss out on future episodes. Juli begins by recounting her early years in East Berlin, a time marked by the tragic loss of her father. Drafted into the army just days before her birth, her father continually deserted to see his family, ultimately leading to his untimely death. Life in East Berlin was a world full of contrasts. Juli describes the indoctrination she experienced in school, where lessons were steeped in socialist propaganda. The Berlin Wall, a symbol of division and oppression, loomed large in the family's life, cutting them from relatives in the West. Despite the regime's efforts to control information, Juli's family found ways to glimpse the outside world through Western TV channels, fueling her desire for freedom. The revolutionary movements of the late 1980s, sparked by events like the Tiananmen Square massacre, galvanized her. Juli joined the Monday demonstrations, risking her safety to demand change. Juli's story doesn't end with the fall of the wall. She moved to Ireland, where she built a new life and family. I'm delighted to welcome Juli to our Cold War conversation.
So I was born in the east of Berlin, behind the Iron Curtain, in 1970.
Which bit of East Berlin were you brought up and born in?
It was districts as well. So Friedrichshain is where I spent most of my childhood, but I was born in, which was at the time almost the outskirts, but is bang in the middle of Berlin now. It's called Kaulsdorf. And Dorf, the end part of it stands for village, so that shows that it was at the time in the 70s. It was suburban. It was a sandy road, sandy lane leading to my granny's house. But then we moved pretty quick to Friedrichshain, which is the hopping middle of Berlin now.
Yeah, there's a park there, I seem to remember.
Yeah, that park, you may have heard it in a previous episode. That park is built on the rubble of the Second World War. So everything that has been tidied up after 45 has been pulled into piles, and this is one significantly big pile, and it's a beautiful park now. It's hard to believe, but this is the rubble of Second World War.
Wow. I'm sure Second World War will come up in our conversation here. So who was in your immediate family?
So the immediate family is really my mom. And because my father passed away very young, so I was 2 really, and my dad was 22 and my mom was 22. And so in East Germany, young families or young people, I guess, were encouraged to have children at around 20. So my dad passed away really young, and just by how life went, my mom, I never had siblings basically. And so it's really just us. And then there's my 2 sets of grandparents, but they all passed on now. And I have a couple of cousins from my mom's sister.
Can I ask you the circumstances of your father's death?
Yeah, that is, I actually reconfirmed with my mom today that anything that I heard and took in as a child, that it hasn't been tainted by anything. So in East Germany, the same story went for everybody. You got drafted into the army, you had to go. And my dad got drafted in 6 days before I was born. And there was no leeway. There was never any, making room for individualism or saying I want to be around for the birth of my firstborn. And so he was drafted in November, and I was born in November then, just half a week later. And so he kept deserting. He kept climbing over fences and everything to come home to us and to see us. So I only have a handful of pictures. And so he literally ran home. He was this tall guy. And then what I didn't know, what my mom told me today, only was that his comrades helped him climbing back in, those things. And he was obviously the deserter, and he was in army prison for it. So I'm not sure how much he was liked. But at some point, there was an accident in the army where he fell into a big hole with a lorry. And he was talking of or complaining about chest pains ever since. And my granny's version of the story goes that because he was such a deserter, they didn't treat him first. And straight away, they were almost like punishing him. My mom is not 100% sure about it. She thinks the accident and his chest pain following that have led to a examination. And literally, so he was in the army, we call it Lazarett. It's almost like a army hospital, I guess. And my mom visited him there. He got radiation. She said cobalt. I'm not sure. And then he came home and came into the one hospital that was only for cancer patients. So we knew if you went to Berlin-Buch hospital, that was cancer, but the word has never been mentioned at the time. And so within 2 weeks, he passed away. So he hadn't finished his army. He basically never came home to us. Yeah, so that's so tragic enough. And I know my mom always wanted children, like more children, but it just hasn't worked out.
I'm really sorry to hear that about your father. So is it thought that the injury he got with the lorry caused it, or was it cancer as well?
My granny always gave me the impression it was the injury, and he hasn't been treated enough. And my mom today said it's been so long, and what struck her then. And if you bear in mind, like, there was no internet, there was nothing, and we were like, only what was printed was published for us, for our knowledge. So my mom was this young widow, or just a widow to be, and there was not much information. She went to the army hospital, she went to this Berlin-Buch hospital, and they didn't give her any insight. They didn't let her look. They didn't give a full diagnosis. So yeah, there was basically no way of actually knowing. So looking back and seeing all the things that came out when the wall came down, there may have been mistakes made and treatment too late or examinations too late, but there was no way to fight against it or find out more.
No. It sounds like your mother was alive at the time the Berlin Wall went up. Is that correct?
Yes, my mom, and her last memory, because I inquired about all the things that I think I know, but just to see if they are really if the rest of my family remembers it the same. But her biggest story is she was 11 at the time. And because it was such a big shock and nobody believed it would happen, her last memory is how she went all the way with her bit of pocket money at 11 years of age across Berlin when the S-Bahn was still going, the city train. And she bought this big acrylic paint set with 42 colors. And that was the last thing she saw of the West. And that was what she brought home and treasured for years. She kept that till she was an adult, I believe.
Wow, that must have been, something that was very memorable for her. Did she travel quite regularly to West Berlin prior to the wall going up with her parents or on her own? Yeah,
so when the backstory of my granny is when the wall went up, that she was the only one of her family, and there was a big family of 7 or 8 or 9. So my granny was the only one in the eastern part of Berlin, and all the other, her brothers and sisters, including their children, which would be my mom's cousins, they all ended up to have settled in the western part. So on that August in 61, when the wall went up, there was basically the family cut into this tiny part of us or my granny and granddad and her two children. And the other much, much bigger part of the family was in the West.
Wow, that must have been quite tough. I mean, I talk about the Berlin Wall, obviously, as you can imagine, quite a lot on this podcast, but it's always difficult to imagine that moment in August 1961 where suddenly that wall goes up and families are cut off from each other. You know, you see these photos of people waving across the wall, and it's so poignant and sad, those family divides.
Yeah, it's definitely, I can only look back because I haven't been born at that or wasn't born at that time. So I'm the same as you, but I feel it. I have it almost in my DNA somehow, the Berlin Wall. And when I see those pictures, I get quite emotional, or like you can, in a particular part of Berlin, you can actually, they made this amazing outdoor museum. You can walk by the wall and see where the tunnels were getting out, and the windows that have been cemented in, all those things, and even young wedding couples waving at where the mom hadn't jumped out of the window. So it sounded less dramatic coming from my granny in a way of that they basically couldn't see each other then. There was no waving because she didn't live right by the wall. But one part of me believes that my granny never fully recovered from it. She was quite lonely in herself, and she was missing her family and had this huge separation really from then on going forward, and no extended family at all.
Yeah, that must have been really, really tough for her. And with your maternal grandmother, she would have been around during World War II. Did she talk much about her experiences in World War II?
They didn't talk very much, but I know a few things. And so I'm not a 100% German. My granny came from Ukraine. And what happened was that her father hadn't returned from the war. And her mom, I'm not sure, but she passed on as well. And so my granny was the oldest of those 8 or 9 or 10 children. And literally with the front, my granny took all those kids, and some were still needing to be carried. And she moved from Ukraine all the way to Berlin, like at night, like walking on trains. She somehow made it. I have no idea. And that was as much as she gave us, in a way that she has done it and that it was tough. And I do think there have been also, I don't know if that is too much for the podcast, I really believe, but she never spoke the word, but the way how she said, and then the Russians came, which is, if you say that in German, it's almost like an insult. I can't really explain it better, but it's not the Russian as a nationality. It's this really deep, deep, terrible insult. And so I do believe, but she never spoke about it because she was extremely, extraordinary, good looking as well, and very, very young. So I believe she most likely has been raped at that time, and she just took the kids and moved and ended up in Berlin. And then an old lady took her in that is no family, but she made her kind of family and got her work in a camp in what do you call those camps that where the army people come back home, basically the soldiers, like almost like a hospital, I guess. And she did the smaller jobs as a nurse in there. So she started earning her own first money. And that's where she met my granddad, who had been a prisoner of war for the English, had been in Northern Ireland and had passed back through Berlin to go back home. And that's where they met, and that's where they both settled in Berlin then.
Wow. What an incredible story there. How old was your grandmother when she was, trying to get her and her 8 siblings back from Ukraine?
So she's born in 29. She was extremely young. 15 or 16.
Wow, incredible.
Yeah.
You just
Very, very
can't
young.
imagine.
No.
Can't imagine being in that situation. And your grandfather was a prisoner of war of the British. Did he talk about that experience or give
Not
any
really.
views on the British?
No, that's the thing. Like, he was very, very guarded in what he said. And then again, you have to bear in mind, we had to be so guarded. Like, everybody could have been spying on you and reporting on you and writing files. So to me as a child, and even as a youngster then, or as a young adult, when I tried to ask questions, like we weren't even taught which side they fought on, because there was only the Nazis in our mind, and that was it. And so he never even said, "Oh, I fought for the Germans." All I know, and that's a bit of a cute little snippet, he was prisoner of war for the British, held in Northern Ireland, but they must have had it quite good, because he was talking about playing pool. I had a bag that he made, a hand-stitched, like a satchel, the size of a satchel, and he made it, he stripped the pool table, the green material of the pool table, and stitched it, hand stitched it. So they couldn't have had it too bad at the end of the war. And he was raving about the redheads, so the Irish girls. So maybe if he experienced trauma, he never once uttered the words.
Mm. And little did he know that his granddaughter would end up living in Ireland.
I know, and it's mad. Yeah, when I said, "Oh, I'm going for 1 year," they literally thought it's where the bombs fall. Like, that's all we ever learned about Ireland, and it's amazing how the circle goes really around, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Mm. What about your relatives in West Berlin? Did they come and visit, or did they send you gifts?
Yeah, so I'm not sure, like when my mom was small, I think in the late 70s, early 80s, the whole rules have relaxed a little bit. But what my mom told me when I was very young, it was almost that if you got visitors from the West, you almost made them park their car somewhere else, because again, that didn't want to be seen, or another neighbor could say, "Oh, they have Western contacts over." So it was always really hush-hush, but they did come. We got all their cast-offs, I remember. So I had obviously also very estranged, or not seeing them often, but second cousins, I guess. And so we got their jeans, for example, their denims, because we didn't have real denims. And it was amazing. But for school, for example, in the mid or late 70s, you had to take off the label at the back if it said, and whatever it was. So you couldn't, even though the teachers could see it was clearly Western denim, but they started turning blind eyes here and there if the label was gone, for example. And so, yeah, they came for the summer, but East Germany was very clever as well. They made every single person crossing to pay 25 German marks per day for their visit. And so let's say if a family of 4 came every single day, it was 100 marks, which was a lot of money then. It'll be 50 euros. Yeah, 50 euros now, but it was a lot of money at the time. So they made it very, very difficult for families to come back and genuinely connect, to stay longer than a day or two.
Was that the amount of money they had to exchange per day?
Yeah. So, yeah, they were forced to exchange it, but it was really only a way for the East German government to have Western currency. Because 25 marks at the time in East Germany, if let's say you visit your family and food was catered for, you could almost not spend it. You couldn't spend the 100 marks, because we actually didn't have anything to spend it on. That's the other thing. We didn't have cool things and goods.
Yeah, I remember crossing over into East Berlin in June '89, and and exchanging the 25 Deutschmarks for the Ostmarks and struggled to spend it. Really struggled to spend it because the things that you'd want would probably be more than 25 marks, and so therefore you were sort of caught in this in between amount. But really appreciate you sharing that. When your cousins were over, what did you do, or what did you talk about with them?
I think the whole political thing didn't even feature because we were maybe too young on that level that we just thought, oh, the Westerners come. And it was such a it was like Disneyland to us, because even when they, like, the clothes alone, their cast-offs was like, it seemed like I spent days to root through them to see what suits me or what fits me even. And the chocolate that they brought, because we had a very poor substitute, which was very sandy, very gritty. We didn't have really cocoa mass chocolate. And so we sucked one square for the whole hour, and it went a long way, that bar. And I think after the chocolate was doled out and everything, we just went on and did kids' things, play hopscotch and in the sand and on the swings, and literally spend time. But not so much that you could think it reflected, oh, you are from the West or you are from the East. But I do know that I always felt inferior for their clothing. That they seem to have shiny hair and gorgeous, very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, living in West Berlin, I presume they could come over reasonably regularly because it was just like a U-Bahn ride for them or an S-Bahn trip.
Yeah, there was only I think 2 or 3 living in Berlin, and the others had then moved at some point when they made real homes, even after the wall came down, to Cologne and Düsseldorf. So that was kind of coming by car and maybe once a summer or at Christmas, that kind of thing. Making and then probably paying even for 7, 8 or 2 weeks, even 7, 8 days or 2 weeks. It seemed quite a while that some families stayed, probably the closest of them, and they made it their summer holiday almost.
Was your family religious at all?
So my granny coming from Ukraine and my granddad also, both maternal now, having been raised in what Hitler thought was Germany, but it's now Polish. So they were very Catholic areas. So they both had a Catholic background. And so there was the actual church buildings existed in East Germany, and there was priests as well. And there was services, and maybe on Sunday, I suppose there was mass. It wasn't every day. And so they practiced by way of teaching us prayers, doing their own praying, and definitely going to mass Sundays and at Christmas. It was not favored by the state whatsoever. So that was also where Granny is one of the very many things where she said, maybe don't say that, just, it's the opposite of what I experienced coming to Ireland, for example, that the young crowd, then when the wall came down, the loop closed completely because the churches opened the doors for us, what we called revolutionaries at the time, to demonstrate, to bring the wall down or have freedom of travel. But at the time when I grew up and was really so enclosed in that world of school and behaving a certain way, that was nothing that you broadcast at all.
And that's a great segue into my next question, because I wanted to ask you about your schooling.
Yes.
What was school like for you?
It was rigid. It was definitely all really super, super organized by way of lining up in the morning, having this big, we called it appell. So the flags were raised, the German flags and the pioneer flags. We had to wear a certain type of handkerchief in a certain knot, almost like a tie knot, but the pioneer knot. And so we were young pioneers with a blue handkerchief around our neck, and then middle with a red handkerchief. And it was so rigid that we had to proclaim we are ready for the state. For example, it was called Young Pioneers Be Ready, and everybody had to raise their hand to their midline of the head and call immer bereit, like we are ready always. And so that's how the day started, for example. And then we had, like, what I didn't know at the time, when you learn reading, for example, your first reading book, only when I looked back as a youngster after the wall came down, I thought how peculiar, how indoctrinated everything was, how the first stories to teach you read was about the father that is in that army and is rescuing us from the class enemy, basically, and saving the border, protecting the border, basically, that wall. So that has been taught to us basically from the age of 6, for starters. I don't remember so much of kindergarten apart from that you had to do everything that was said at the time. So you had to eat up. You couldn't get off from the table to go and play again unless you ate like everybody else. You had to rest. You had to close your eyes even when you weren't tired at that particular hour. But my first reading book is where I very consciously know at the age of 6 that it was all about the father. Our songs were the same in music. They were very communist or socialist songs, how they were called at the time. And geography was another very interesting one. So we didn't learn, obviously, about the world, because the world was the class enemy, and everything west of Germany was kind of the forbidden fruit, but also the class enemy. That was the common word used by everybody. And so the maps west, including West Berlin, which is this little dot in the old GDR, but right beside East Berlin, they were grayed out. So they were literally a nothing on the map. So we learned nothing about other countries, or historically we learned little slices. We learned maybe the French Revolution, but not how it all came about, or what France, let's say, did in the Second World War. Then we learned the next thing was all about the atrocities of Adolf Hitler in the Second World War. And it completely cut out that a guy on the Russian side called Stalin even existed. I heard the word or the name Stalin, for example, when I was 19 or 20 after the wall came down, from a then boyfriend, and he talked about the Hitler-Stalin pact. I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Do not tell me you've never heard about Stalin." And we hadn't. And that is so hard. Like, my kids don't fully understand now, because obviously in times of internet, you go and Google. But we had nothing. We had just the books that were printed and censored by the state.
Wow. So on the maps, was West Germany greyed out? If there was a map of Europe?
Yeah. No, there wasn't really a map of Europe. There was a map of the Eastern Bloc. And there was maybe a big map of Russia, and there was a map of Germany. So at the outlines of not Germany, of the GDR, of East Germany, and the outlines of the GDR on the western side, basically, there was just that little bit that was hanging over to the edge of the map that was also grayed out, and West Berlin was grayed out.
So did you do well at school?
Yeah, without boasting, I was so bright that I didn't have to learn anything. I didn't have to study, basically. I literally just had really good grades, and it just came to me academically. I didn't have to work for it, basically. So I had really, really good grades by default. But there had been then a shift in time. Let's say I was possibly around maybe 13 to 15 or so, when we realized and suddenly thought, oh, okay, and there's this wall, and there's, and you pick up small things that Granny says. Oh, my mom told about her set of paints, and the cousins came and the cousins went, and I had this yearning to travel for the simple reason that Berlin had that advantage, I guess, of being able to receive the Western channels. So we had to climb up our rooftops and put the aerials in a certain way that we can catch Western channels. So I think from around the age of 12, I was watching Western channels. You could not, even to your best friend, say it. You just had to be so careful. You were always warned by your parents or by Granny in particular, do not say this, we will get in trouble. So, and that is an age where you start wondering about things and it doesn't really add up, and you live through this madness and you don't fully understand it. You then have those two sides. You watch Western cartoons and then you go to school and don't say it. And you get really good grades for talking about the class enemy. So, and regards bigger politics, we have on our national news, it was always how well we are doing, how great the harvest is this year and for the next 5 years, and how amazing the production lines are going. And then there was about 5 minutes or so was on the Western or national or international politics, I should say, or worldwide. And the main things that I remember is that West Germany was absolutely the class enemy. America was the last of the last. And we really, as sad as it sounds, we have not learned to actually think for ourselves. It took a long time after the wall came down to even have an entrepreneurial mindset or to try something new or to finish something that doesn't suit your lifestyle anymore, because it was this ready set life that was set for you, apprenticeship or study, the one job, and you were just led into it.
You didn't really have a lot of choice.
No.
The government decided what job you were going to be doing.
Yeah.
And you had really no choice about that. No, the notes you sent me, you went to somewhere called Pioneer Republic.
Oh,
Can you tell me about that?
I nearly forgot about that. So based on my academic performance, I guess, you got something like what would you call it? Like a reward trip to this Pioneer Republic. And so we got 6 weeks away from home, like a summer camp. And little did I know that it's all very politically tainted as well. So I can't remember that there was school. So that was the reward, I guess. And so maybe no maths and literature. But we had to, as a group, and I suppose they came from all of the Republic, not just from Berlin. We had to sit together, watch this East German newsreel every night. One of us got picked on the spot. Like I found it so difficult. I had such a heartache each night of hopefully not being picked, and on the dot to unravel the German news, to basically, have a political opinion, have a political stand without saying anything wrong. We had to do little cartoons about America, and all was just absolutely bananas. It was a complete polite camp, and anything in sports, for example, PE, let's say, there was a lot of PE in that camp actually as well, but it was also at that young age, I think I was 12, at that age when we, instead of throwing a ball or a shot putty thing, it was always hand grenades against the enemy. So we had, for throwing and measuring how many meters you can throw the thing, it was always hand grenades against the class enemy at that age.
Did you find yourself getting indoctrinated and believing the propaganda?
Oh, well, to a certain extent, I think none of us, because you're so in it, and again, I have to stress that there was no internet and no other books. We had a little bit of the Western channels, and so we watched Western news as well in my family. And there was definitely that two-sided feeling of wow, which part is true, and even the advertising that, how they make even really, really crappy burgers look so well on advertising. So we thought we are missing the world there. We are missing, like I really thought if the wall ever comes down, the first thing is a burger in one of those really terrible places. I thought this is the world. So we knew there was something not adding up, but the extent of everything when the wall came down, to see how much has been so indoctrinated and so tailored to, to the needs of the government. Like I don't, and the, let's say even the role of the Stasi, the vastness of it, I don't think we could have even seen it. Like there was definitely stuff, we were in it, we were brainwashed very, very cleverly, very gentle and fast and deep,
I mean, did you sort of struggle to deal with those contradictions? Because you're hearing at home sort of like different information to what your teachers are telling you. Was that a challenge for you? Did you ever entertain thoughts, for example, that your parent or your grandmother was not betraying the state, but obviously, telling you that the state wasn't all it was cracked up to be?
No, that's funny, actually. That, even when you said it, I kind of felt this peculiar, oh God, no. It was almost the other thing. I was definitely on my granny's side completely and thinking, oh, we need to protect that. Because I was there most weekends, and on the way going home, she always said, don't say that at school. That was like, and I was such a quiet, like I really thought everything true, I think from young age anyway. But she still had the need to say that each time, because how much can you trust a 12-year-old, for example, to not let anything slip at school when stuff is being read out or so. So she had the need to say that every time and almost make me promise I won't talk about it at school. But I almost felt like the loyalty to my granny was way bigger, There was, and especially, and that coincides probably with the time with Western telly in my life, and seeing other news and hearing like just other, even when I didn't understand it necessarily, because you had nobody to bounce it off with either, but to think, oh, there's a war in this country, or there's a whole continent called South America. So there was definitely that I just held the space somehow for it without, I do think it's probably trauma in one sense, but you know how brains adapt as well, and you just survive this as well without fully understanding what's happening. I think maybe, even though it sounds dramatic, but maybe all of us have been to a certain extent holding that trauma within us at the time, without realizing.
I think one of the themes I find very common with former East Germans that I speak to on the podcast is that you almost have two separate lives. You have your life in public and how you behave in public, and that would include at school and with your workmates. And then you have your private life where you can be yourself and talk more openly about how you feel about the state. Yeah,
that makes complete sense. And that's exactly, I couldn't have said it better. So I can only second that. But then there's always more, isn't it? And when the wall came down, for example, my best friend, she took her, because you could get your Stasi file, your state security file, and she took hers out. And then you do see who actually, even of your neighbors or of your even friends, who may have informed on you as well, and put stuff together of information. So I consciously chose not to get my file, and I was 19 when the wall came down, and I felt that I don't even care. I only just in the last year of before the wall came down, when it all started, to cook a bit, I started living that life as well. And I started going to those Monday demonstrations under the roof of the church. And for us, it really started with, the Tiananmen Square, the shooting there in China on that place.
Yeah.
And the West German channels obviously reported it on the day and after. And so I saw that. And so I was an 18-year-old, I think. And I saw that, and I was so deeply, emotionally affected, because they were like my youngsters, they were like me. And the Western, that was the Western news, and the Eastern news said nothing at all. And I watched for 2 or 3 days, and I was in June, I think. And I watched, and nothing has been reported. And I think that was my very personal flipping over to, this is not right. I was coming from, I'd love to see the Egyptian pyramids at some point, because I had seen a documentary on Western telly, and as a 12-year-old or so, and having this dream that I thought it'll never happen, to after Tiananmen Square, I felt this is just not right, and then it completely flipped to the other side. And being 18 and 19 is a really cool age to make history then,
Absolutely. And I want to come into that in a moment. With your friend with her Stasi file, did she find anything in there that surprised her?
The absurdity of it all was that neighbors and friends, they took the time and the whole administration and the money that it all must have cost to say stupid things like, whatever her second name starts with the W, so it was the W dot. So they didn't call her even the full name. So the W, they don't own a car, and she seems to be getting on with her husband, but sometimes we hear noises at night. And on Sundays, they seem to cycle to the family, or they cycle as a family around the lakes or something. And sometimes there is this and this work colleague visiting. And it went on and on like this. So there was nothing even in there. And people just found stuff to write down. And what it includes, we think it's just a piece of paper that has been typed, but that includes already 2 people. That includes the actual informing person sitting as we are now sitting with the guy that works officially for the Stasi. The other one was called informal. And the other one that got paid by the Stasi was the guy then that said, okay, I'd sit down with you and you tell me everything and I'll type it out. So every single report that was written, as slow and profane it sounded, involved an hour of 2 people sitting down and reporting on somebody.
It's the banality of the information that's in those files that
Yeah.
always surprises me. But then I guess if you're an informer, you need to look as though you are providing information. So, there's probably sort of amounts in there that are made up or just so that they can give some information. But it's interesting. I mean, it's a tricky one because, you can imagine if you're somebody working in East Germany in whatever job and you don't know the wall is going to come down in 1989 and the Stasi say to you, if you don't tell us about your neighbours and what they're up to, your children will not go to university and will have very poor jobs. You'd like to think you take the moral high ground in that situation and refuse to do that, but I don't know. It's tough, and the Stasi were very clever at that psychological pressure.
Very, and it actually, I nearly forgot about it, but it actually happened to my mom. I just had totally forgotten this, but I have exactly what you said as first-hand information. when I was about 16, and my mom got this visitor to our flat, to our place calling with his briefcase, and they disappeared in the living room for whatever, an hour or two, and I had no idea what it was. And when he left, my mom was literally pale as a sheet and said, "Oh my God, you don't know what to do." So she told me everything. And she at the time worked in the office for the company that did all the repairs for the embassies. So like heating and plumbing for the embassies. So, and what it meant was the plumbers, electricians, tilers, they saw how the people live and the diplomats live. And so this Stasi guy approached my mom to basically inform on her colleagues exactly for that. How's the mood? What he wanted to know. How do they feel about the discrepancy of how places look, how the embassies look, what they have, what they see there. And my mom was absolutely like, she was frozen. She was so fearful. She said, "I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do." And now that you say it, I literally said exactly what you just said. I said to her, just pretend, just do, and that nobody says, and they're all, and maybe, wow, yeah, there's a golden tap, but so what? And just don't give anything away. And so, and I know he visited. I don't know how they announced themselves, or if they just literally called. I mean, even if you think that the invasion of privacy to just call to your flat like this, like my mom had no idea that this person is calling that day, in that evening, that time. And so I know that he came 2 or 3 more times, and it fizzled out, and then the wall came down anyway. But she was really, really stressed over that, and just did her absolute best to not say a thing, because they were all great guys. I remember even the names still, like they really, really good colleagues, and that's the last thing you want to do.
It's really interesting to hear, that level of insight. Your mum remarried, didn't she?
Yeah, she remarried when I was about 4. And like on a very personal level, it's all, she was probably so lost, and so having lost the love of her life. But on a more political level with you, here is that your man was 14 years older, so a little bit of a gap there. And I didn't get on with him personally. He had been married 4 times before. He had 4 children, and he clearly didn't like children at all. And so that didn't help my upbringing. But what we know now, at the time, I think my mom was just dazzled by this somebody that knows how to live and is 36 and has a Lada, which was a Russian car, where every normal person in Germany had to wait about 10 to 13 years to buy a Trabant. Even if you were to have those 10,000 marks at the time, the production lines were so slow that you had to still wait. You just had to wait roughly 10 years for your Trabant. And anybody who doesn't know how the car looks should Google it, because it's just this tiny little fiberglass car. It's not even metal. And we called it cardboard at the time. But he had a Lada. Later we had a Volga. And so we didn't know much. Like, I definitely was disconnected from him, and he didn't take much heed of me as a child. So there was no conversations. But I do know now, looking back, he came home 3-4 times a year with hampers from West German stuff, like not expensive stuff, but we didn't even have pineapple in a tin. Those cheap tins probably from Aldi or so. But to us, it was like something so big hampers, like genuinely what you get at Christmas in the supermarkets now. He came home with those. He still kept a flat for himself. So I now look back and think this is where interviews happened or investigations happened. He came home quite late often. And so those were the sure signs to have been, those privileges only fell to Stasi people. So now, like, I lost touch. My mom separated from him when I was 16, so 3 years before the wall came down. And I still didn't know at the time. I still didn't fully realize, because he had his story for coming home late was that he was being a taxi. And we didn't have enough taxi ranks and taxi drivers in East Germany, so people privately just trailed the streets and drove around to see if somebody needs a taxi for a few bob, for a tenner. And so he was saying to us he was doing this, like driving around as a private taxi. But when the wall came down and we started reading up and knowing about how Western products look and about the cars, for sure, like that is the surest giveaway that he had access to much cooler Russian cars than anybody else that I knew.
Fascinating. So, Julie, I'm just trying to get my head around all the grannies here. Your mum's gran was the one that fled from Ukraine. You had relatives in the West. What about your dad's mother? Was she still in the East?
Yeah, so my dad's mom, we stayed in touch, and she was definitely an amazing granny to me. And I think I was about 14. So this granny worked a little bit higher up in a state library, and where all probably the bigger books that not everybody had access to could get, but still, again, all censored. We are still talking Eastern Bloc books. And her lungs were bad or something. And she got a trip to West Germany, to a sanatorium, and she got it given because she was so trustworthy working for this library. And she got given that trip, and little did they know, my granny, she literally fled. She fled the sanatorium and made it even further north of West Germany, and she never came back. So I was really happy for her. I was already at that age to think we are the imprisoned ones, and we are the ones behind the wall, really. And so it was amazing in one sense that I couldn't get my head fully around it, but I know that I felt cheerful for her. But my uncle, which is my dad's brother, really, he said he had to endure numerous interviews by the Stasi. What did he know? Where could she have gone? Like, quite probably interrogations, which I think he also played down a bit. And then, so little did any of us know that the wall will come down. There was no contact whatsoever, and that was the real loss for us. That I had lost a granny overnight, and he lost his mom, like my uncle, and suddenly she wasn't part of our family. But when the wall came down, we learned that she had written that every letter got intercepted. There was like nothing. She had sent stuff and parcels. Nothing had gotten through. Like, they literally, even to have this whole apparatus of bureaucracy, to somebody in the post to keep an eye on all those names of all those people where you want to intercept letters. It's quite mind-boggling, I think, after looking back on it.
Absolutely. And this was 1984. She fled the GDR. So you would have been about 15.
I was 14
then.
or 15 then. 13 or 14 really. But also interesting because we talked so much, we were really, really close, and she taught me a lot, and we also talked politically, but she also didn't feel she could say this out loud. I had no idea she'd be so unhappy somewhere along the lines that she would flee the country, and it just shows. And I know I was just a child, but equally, I don't think she told her own son, or she told my mom, that's how careful you needed to be with a plan like this to actually not tell,
That must have been quite a reunion when you met her again after the wall came down.
Yeah, and she came back to Berlin because she did miss it. She did miss Berlin. She missed her family. So she took up with her sister then in the west of Berlin. So I'm not really sure. Like looking back, I wish I would have asked more questions that only come to you when you are older, like how she maybe from the north of Germany, West Germany, how she didn't maybe fly into West Berlin and be with her sister already. But I know she stayed on the North Sea in quite north of West Berlin. But yeah, that was something else. And definitely at a time when we didn't expect it. You know, we kind of, at some point, you make peace with that person is not able to get through even with a love letter or anything, you know.
So we're moving on to the sort of later part of the 1980s, and you mentioned earlier that sort of like a switch flicks in your head in this period that you realise this isn't right.
Yeah.
That you know the state is lying to me, and I think the phrase you used is things started cooking in East Germany.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely Berlin had that advantage, I guess, of being able to receive the Western channels. And the funny thing is, I think the Stasi at some point almost couldn't keep up, because legend goes that they also checked the aerials and knew who's watching Western telly and everything. But at some point, like it just was exhausting, you know, to keep tabs on everybody. And so we had this information. We knew we are definitely being lied to about what happened in China. And there was this whole movement that the church, funnily enough, opened the doors and said, because the first demonstrations happened and always on a Monday. So I don't know how the very, very first happened, but I was very quickly in it and part of it. And the churches said, you are safe here and we can chat about it. And young politicians or student bodies came and everybody sat together and chatted. And that was the first time I experienced kind of violence from the state, because suddenly the water cannons and the gas throwers and gas bombs were out. And it was exciting, it was exhilarating, but it was also like I was worried that that I don't get home. And I wasn't sure, how do you get to see your mom again? And we didn't even have a landline. You know, most people didn't have a landline. There was just public phones. So there was this young madness and excitement, but also a deep, deep knowing that it's the only way to do it. It's the only thing to do now, because you know more. And I have no idea how it swapped to the other cities that didn't have Western channels. And again, before mobile phones, before text messages, I was studying in Leipzig, which is in the south of East Germany at the time. And suddenly, I know I didn't start it, but suddenly there was Monday demonstrations as well. And it literally snowballed over that summer and right into November. And it was thousands. Like it was suddenly thousands. And the Western channels obviously reported. So we could see ourselves, you know, chanting, "We are the people," and we want to travel, you know. The madness is we didn't want to leave home, really. We just wanted to travel and we wanted to be able to say a couple of things. And so we could see ourselves on the Western channels demonstrating in the East, and then suddenly seeing it in the North, in the South, everywhere. And that was pretty much, it was like sending you a text on the mobile phones, because suddenly we could see it's happening everywhere and we are actually connected.
So were you at university in Leipzig?
I was. That kind of shows you as well how you didn't get necessarily what you're looking for, because I had straight A's, I had everything. I was hoping to study psychology at the time, and I didn't get it because I didn't know the right people. And so I had to look last minute for an apprenticeship. And that's also actually an interesting one. And it was very last minute. The good stuff was gone, and it was called, it doesn't exist anymore, it was called professional bookseller. So you had a 2-year apprenticeship where you were taught everything about literature and art, and everything about how to run a shop and accounts and money, and but also about all the publishing houses in the East. So we had to learn from the 70 publishing houses that all did censored books. We had to learn the profile, who they cater for, the series that they're printing. And that's what I did in Leipzig, the apprenticeship for that, 2 years of that.
That sounds like a great course. I've always fancied opening a bookshop.
Yeah, it was really cool. We also learned how to wrap books. And so I'm the best present wrapper because that stands to me now. But the madness was when the wall came down that all the publishing houses fell away. So everything that I had to learn so meticulously suddenly didn't exist anymore. And I have one good story where like thinking for yourself was definitely not favored either. There was a day when the shop was really quiet and I was quite bored, and I took it upon myself to decorate the window and just thought, oh, there's Mother's Day coming. I do something with it. And I got into so much trouble for taking initiative because it just wasn't you. You had to do what was taught on the day. So it was a great course. I learned a lot about literature, but then again, Russian and German literature. But it still opens your eyes to the world a little bit more, isn't it? And it's different than school as well. And you have differently time. I was away from home. It was like a boarding school. So we had also time to make revolution, you know?
Yeah. I love the fact that one of your skills you picked up in East Germany was being able to wrap a good present from doing from working with books in a bookshop. That's brilliant. Yeah. So the demonstrations get bigger and bigger. There's a couple of other things you mentioned in your notes. You talk about oranges from Cuba for Christmas.
Oh yeah. People ask me, were you not allowed to smile in East Germany, or did you all wear grey clothes? So those things are definitely myths. But we definitely didn't have stuff, and we also didn't have, it's also not true that we never had bananas, but it was so far and few in between that you could count them for your lifetime. And so Cuban oranges were definitely available at Christmas, but also rationed. So you maybe got a kilo. So, and what you did then was, let's say my mom and myself, we queued in 2 different fruit shops within our district, and we had 2 kilos between us. And I don't even know why we did it, because they were quite dry. They were exactly the ones that not an ounce of juice from it, but it was something different to get in the first place. But what we learned later as well, that the government did a clever thing for the Berliners, because, and maybe to keep us a little bit calm, because we can get other channels, we see there is another world out there. They favored the Berliners. There was more Cuban oranges. If there ever was bananas, they kind of went to Berlin. There was a couple of brands of ice cream that tasted better, that was only for Berlin. So, and we didn't know it at the time. Like, I was definitely not aware until the wall came down that we were favored in that sense. Yeah.
I've heard that from people who lived further afield from Berlin, that they didn't get the supplies that, when they came to Berlin, they were like, whoa, what's going on here? And I think Berlin was a bit of a showcase. Typing a whole book of Walter Janker. Oh, yeah. What's the story there?
Well, that's an interesting one. He was a communist by his own description, but he also got in trouble behind the wall, and he went to a political prison in the East because he was stuff that we never learned, like the 53 Rising and the 17th of June, little mini day revolution. So he spoke about it, and he was a communist through and through, and he wanted to stay in the country, and he wanted to just make it better, like a lot of people actually. But he got in trouble. He got imprisoned for speaking up and speaking out. And he wrote a book, Difficulties with the Truth. And I cannot remember. I must have gotten a copy. But then again, no copiers. We only had typewriters and the little blueprint paper. So what I did for my friends and a friend of mine reminded me about 5 years ago, he said, I still found your copy. So I typed this whole book by 3 with the blueprint paper for my friends to have access to this book, to read about
Wow.
Walter Janka and the difficulties with the truth. And I had completely forgotten it only when like the podcast now prompted me to, when you said just think about a few things, and then I remembered, but I had forgotten completely for 25 years. But those were the things that you literally just did because you had no other tools. You could only do what you could do, and I could type it up, but I couldn't copy it anywhere. I couldn't take photographs and print it and bind it somewhere. So I must have sat there at night or at some point and typed this book for 2 weeks or something.
God. Wow. Wow. And, potentially for distributing that, you could have got into quite a bit of trouble, I guess.
Yeah. The thing is, I think it was a whirlwind for me because my own awakening, let's say once more about what happened in China on the shooting on the square to the wall coming down, was so short that I was invincible, and never thought anything could happen to me. But my then boyfriend, for example, had a brother, a little bit later. So I didn't know that story then when I was totally going for it. And he had a brother that was 6 years older, and he did exactly that at uni. He distributed a few leaflets, very simple, freedom of travel, freedom of speech. And he actually went to the same prison as Walter Janka. He had to be there. And he literally, when the wall came down, he was so broken by it. Like there was so much anger, I could tell. He couldn't even speak about it, He was only a youngster as well, just merely like a handful of years older than me, but it was a whole generation because he had those 5 or 6 years ahead of me being differently awakened and taking action at a time, let's say in 84, when it was so tight. There was no way to get away with anything like that in 84.
As part of the educational curriculum in East Germany, you would have probably had to work in a factory. Did that happen to you?
Oh, yes, everybody has had to. And I think it was quite often, it was almost to keep the production lines going as well, I think. I don't think it was much for our education, really. I think we just helped the production. And so we had to walk in the morning then like a factory worker. And I was in a factory that did all the brakes for the Trabant, for the cars. But it was literally, everybody was put on a different production line, and you did 8 hours. You put in a full days of work in a very industrial smelling and loud hall, I guess. And up to this day, like I'm talking 40 years later now, something like this, I just don't forget there was one mistake I made, but it went through somehow. And I think I worried for about 10 years of my childhood that maybe somebody will have an accident because that brake was faulty. And so that's another little snippet. But yeah, we had to do that. And obviously it was sold to us as an idea for education, but, and how to see how the socialist system even works and how great we are. That was always how great we are and how well we are doing. But looking back, I think, because it was so flawed as a system, we were literally helping the production lines.
I think they used to put the army working on the farms and things like that to keep agriculture going as the economy was struggling. So, Julie, my favourite question I love to ask my guests, where were you when you heard the Berlin Wall had opened?
Oh, Ian, I'm almost not ashamed, but it's so mad. Like, we were in a theatre pretty close to the wall, because the theatre line is kind of close enough to the Brandenburger Gate where we couldn't get close to. We had to be about 150 meters away, but then left of it is where the few theatres were that we had. So we were at a show. I was with friends, and when we came out of it at 10 p.m. or so, there was people heading the opposite direction, like direction for the Brandenburger Gate, and they said, "Oh, the wall is open." And we said, "Yeah, fuck off." Basically, we literally said, like, "Yeah, right." And we thought they're a bit drunk. And I went home that night. Didn't believe it. Like, what the hell? And so all of us went to sleep. Next morning, we went to uni. I studied after the apprenticeship then. We went to uni in Berlin. And one of my friends had this really weird tabloid newspaper in her hand and said, "I was over there." And it was like, oh my God, that was the biggest face palm ever. So what we did, we all mitched and bunked off school that day, of college. And we all went home. We got our passports. We sat at 12 o'clock at that and that border passing checkpoint. And so we gave everybody enough time, each other. And we were still afraid. We were still afraid to be shot. And in that tabloid actually was, the wall is open, the wall is, the border's open. So we weren't sure if we are going to make this or if we are being shot. So we literally went almost hand in hand, like 12 or so people, like my friends at the time, to cross the border, show our passport, got a stamp. We still weren't sure will we be let back. And I still remember that feeling because we actually wanted to go back home. It wasn't that we wanted to flee. We just wanted to travel and have the freedom. And so I spent my day just driving around on a double-decker bus and seeing everything. Every East German got a welcome present of 100 marks. And they were everywhere, at every corner, doling them out. I can't remember how they kept track of not picking it up twice. But anyway, I went on the bus. That was all for free. I got this not so good burger in one of those places.
Hey, you finally got your burger.
I got the burger. I bought a pair of way too expensive jeans for 60 marks at the time, but I wanted really cool jeans because I wanted to look really pretty. And I bought licorice. I bought a meter of licorice for my mom, who, besides her set of pains, she always spoke about how the West German licorice, how we could never have licorice since. So I got her a meter or 2 meters of licorice and came home at 11 at night or something. So spent 12 hours in the West and was quite taken aback that we could just pass on the way back. They didn't even look at us. And at the weekend, then I went with my mom because my mom had to still go to work. And she was only 39 at the time. And which is so young, like it's more than 10, it's almost 15 years younger than me now. But she felt at the time, she was almost sad. And she said her life was taken and was over almost, that she felt at 39, there's like everything was taken from her. And I have it so good at 19 that I experience like the wall coming down. But that didn't turn out to be true either, because there was so much life to be lived, but she had to work then, Thursday and Friday. And on Saturday, we went together, went back on the buses, discovered the area. And yeah, amazing.
Wow, that must have been quite a time going there with your mum, who'd last seen it sort of when she was aged 11.
Yeah.
Was she just amazed at what it was like? Or
I think we were. I'm not sure if shock is the right word, but I do believe it didn't fully hit us for a year or something. We did it. I even got a job in the West then, like a few months later, I had Western money. I earned once a week, just to support my studies, and had Western money, which was so much more worth. It was 5 times worth the Eastern money. So I could go for lunches in the West and stuff. And I did all this, but I don't think it fully registered, like only looking back and telling stories, and people say, God, there's a book in you, or my kids not even getting it because the actual places or the political system is gone. I think it didn't hit us fast. It just slowly trickled in that, oh wow, we are really traveling, And my first travel then was, in fact, the Egyptian pyramids. That's where I went to see
Brilliant.
them. Yeah, my dream.
And did it live up to expectations?
Totally. I went with my best friend who picked up her Stasi file. So we are the best travel buddies anyway. And she got sick. She got the revenge of the pharaoh, how it's called. So I had to, help her through all of that. And we got chased at a market because and then we had to buy this perfume of those guys. And we went into all the tourist traps that you could. But yeah, I never felt just the Sphinx, even, to see this huge monument in the middle of, at the beginning of a desert. Yeah, no, I never, like that was one of my biggest memories of travel, because it was the first. Yeah, wonderful.
When you crossed over with your friends that first time, what crossing point did you go over?
We went up Bernauer Straße, Bernauer, and it's the eastern part is Prenzlauer Berg. It's close to Mitte. It's right. Another maybe 10K to Checkpoint Charlie, and Bernauer Straße.
Yeah, so it's the French sector, I think.
Yeah.
There, yeah.
Yeah, and it's actually where the houses were so close to the wall that even the people, like, they couldn't block everything off, but there was those towers as well, and anybody that lived there, I had a friend there, they were really instructed by their own family, do not wave, don't engage, don't aggravate them. And so yeah, it's a peculiar crossing point. That's actually that is the same crossing that I mentioned earlier, Bernauer Straße, where they made this open plan museum, really, where you actually see the tunnel diggings and the house bordering directly onto the west. So it's an amazing place actually to visit, anybody who's going to Berlin.
It is. I mean, it's, as you say, it's where the Berlin Wall Memorial is, and you get a real sense of what the wall fortifications look like there as well. They've sort of reconstructed a section with the death strip there too. So when you first cross into West Berlin, does it live up to expectations as to what you thought it would be like? Because I've heard different the reason I'm asking is, and the reason I asked what crossing point you went over is I did interview one guest who crossed into Kreuzberg over the Oberbaumbrücke and said it was a right dump. It was a real disappointment because there was litter everywhere and graffiti.
Yeah, well, the thing is that we also felt, because there's the death strip for starters as well. So there's this long thing where you don't know even what's happening yet. And then on the other side, like, my memory is also not disappointment, but also, oh, okay, the houses are grey here too. So that was one of my first thoughts. And then even on the buses, but I loved it. I loved to see that little bit further than just where people think, oh, you have to see the Kudam or something, like this big avenue. And so I must have gone through areas that were very, maybe even social buildings or very working class, very also dirty looking, that I also thought that's interesting. I definitely found it interesting. But I also ended up on the Kudam. That's how I ended up with way too expensive jeans. And there was pure glitz and also not a true reflection of West Berlin, to be honest. But I do know that the party feeling, the welcome, that may have changed then over the next few months or so. The welcome, like literally people hugging and crying and throwing bananas off lorries and all the weird things that happened. It was that party feeling of, oh my God, that freedom that I took home, Like I pretty much had buyer's regret 2 months later and thought, oh, damn, those jeans were way too expensive. They don't even suit me, I was definitely in the wrong area, to buy them. And we had no clue really what we were doing. But the beauty that I remember is that party feeling of the welcome feeling of you are the brothers, you're the sisters. And I know it had changed then, and there was definitely, it was politically very hard to unify and to see how it all happens with money and industrial production lines and everything. But there was definitely the first months or so was this joyful, I almost took it, we did it. I had that feeling of, oh my God, look at us, we did it. That's how I felt, Yeah.
Well, you did. I mean, you were on those demonstrations. How did your mother fare after the wall had opened as far as work? Did she keep her job, or did she have challenges in terms of getting work?
Yeah, she definitely had challenges because she worked for this company for the embassies still at that time. And then there was definitely changes because suddenly the East German political system, it was crumbling. And so the embassies started being less. So she was at some point, not immediately, but at some point she was laid off. And there was a time also of fear and anxiety because the one thing we didn't know was unemployment. And to find your own way and to look to further yourself, like that, just not in our psyche at all. And so I remember that she was definitely afraid of it, a little bit down, I know there was tears and she had like, who will employ me now? And definitely going to the Arbeitsamt, the unemployment office, which to us felt degrading or like definitely not the place you want to be. But then she found another company that did pretty much the same, like heating and plumbing and servicing for just a normal setup within, like not for embassies. And then they moved on. Then she met somebody lovely for her life. So, and they together founded a company, again, heating and plumbing, and then they never looked back. Then they were their own bosses.
Oh, that's a lovely ending to the story. Yeah. But how did you end up in Ireland, Julie?
Oh, yeah, that is, when you make plans and then life happens as well. And with my then boyfriend, who I mentioned earlier, who had the brother that was in political prison, we spent quite a number of years together. And after one particular holiday in Berlin, and we went paddling and camping, and he was kind of not a city person, and he got almost a little bit down. And a colleague of his said, why don't you mind my holiday home in Ireland, in Boyle, of all places, in the middle of nowhere? And what started off as a joke was materialized because we didn't really have money. I was still studying. And I said, oh, we could cycle there, And it was a little bit of a joke, but also not, because I was a good cycler, and cycled to uni every day. And so was he. And so we got good bikes over the course of a year. We got good bikes, good camping equipment. And the plan was to stay for 1 year and just do this. And we are not together anymore, but we both fell in love with the country. So that's 28 years ago or so. And both of us are still here, and we just loved it. We loved the people. The weather seemed to be a little bit better then than it's now. But I definitely made a life here. I had 3 children, an amazing love, and running my own business. So this is where life is for the foreseeable future.
Oh, that's lovely. That's lovely. And did you know English before you came to? I mean, had you?
Not really. And we had a bit of school English, but it was really like, my name is, and I love the London Underground. And that's was probably as far as it went, like we had Russian till the cows came home. Blued into us, like bet into us every day of the week, and English maybe an hour a week or something. For some reason, they allowed English, which is quite interesting. I was wondering about that later, but yeah, 1 hour, but nothing to write home about, nothing to hold a conversation. And it took a while. It took me 2 years of headache when people talked, and it went fast and the Irish accent. But I remember very, very, very slowly to be able to have less headaches, follow a little bit. And I remember one breakthrough where I listened to, from the Beatles on the radio, Norwegian Wood. And I literally, it flicked also in my head, and I could hear the lyrics. And I said, oh my God, it's a story. It's like they're really telling a story there. And so and then I started reading books, and you have to, once you're in the country, it's the only way really to learn it, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is. You've got to just immerse yourself in it. I mean, your accent is amazing, because I can hear the Irish in there, and I can still hear some of the German in there. But that's a sensational story you shared with me. I love that.
Lovely. I'm glad to. It was actually my kind of niece-in-law and her fiance who said it when we met first. He got introduced to the family, and he said, "Have you ever listened to them?" And I said, "No, but I'm always on the lookout for good podcasts." And literally, that's how it came to be, that I contacted you. I just thought, let's see if I have enough to tell you if you're interested. And so I go back to the family with the link.
It's a fascinating story. I mean, have your kids asked you about your past and what was it like living there?
Yeah, I think so. My kids are between just gone 19 this week and 26. So to them, and when they were small, we always went 2-3 weeks every summer visiting Granny and hanging with the cousins, kind of thing. And I think what they find the hardest to understand is that we stand in a place, and it's the country, it's the physical, geographical country, but in that place there was the Stasi, and in that place we weren't allowed to say. And they find that really, or they found it for years and years so difficult. But now that they were a bit older, for the last 10 years, we started going and did, let's say, the Wall Museum, the GDR Museum, the tunnel tour, where people dug. And it's starting to add up for them. And my youngest asked me now to write down all the stories, and almost like a legacy, anything that comes to mind, And I started the book. I started last month for just like a notebook, but you never know what comes out of it yet either. But yeah, they're definitely intrigued, and they are also, I think, a little bit proud. That it's
they should
different.
Definitely be proud of you.
Yeah, there's a story, and but they want to know now more. They're at that age where they realize I'm doing the same and trying to get more stories from Granny who has passed, and they see me searching for certain answers. So they are now seeing that if I was to write stuff down now or chat now, that they don't need to do it then when it's too late.
Well, Juli, I'm Very grateful you got in contact with me. Delighted that we've captured your story and really looking forward to sharing it with our listeners.
Yes. Thank you so much,
Right.
Ian. I'm 100% delighted for the opportunity. I can't wait, actually.
Don't miss the episode extras such as videos, photos and other content. Just look for the link in the podcast information. The podcast wouldn't exist without the generous support of our financial supporters, and I'd like to thank one and all of them for keeping the podcast on the road. The Cold War conversation continues in our Facebook discussion group. Just search for Cold War Conversations in Facebook. Thanks very much for listening and see you next week.